Today's businesses are on a vigilant watch for threats in an ongoing cyber war. It's time to get real-world solutions to protect and secure your valuable business information anytime, anywhere. Welcome to Cybersecurity America with Josh Nicholson. You're about to gain special access into a world of restricted information and a backstage pass to the inner sanctum of cybersecurity operations. Here's your host,
Josh Nicholson again, back here for season number 2. So glad to have such a wonderful season 1 with 30 episodes. The last one culminating with the interview of Governor McCrory talking about technology and cyber risks within government. What is it like from a mayor? What's it like from a governor's perspective? But on season 2, we have a couple things that we want to cover. One, as I give you kind of an overview, is there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence. We've done a couple episodes on our show about that. This one was more of, we want to start to get into artifacts and forensics artifacts. How do you tell what a decision was made? What are some of the kind of the prompts? We wanted to give some more of the usability tips and features that we're seeing with, say, ChatGPT and some of the other common models. We're also going to have a time on where we're going to have some recruiters on that are going to talk about what do you need from a resume, a skill perspective? What are people looking for? What is important to them? What are the fields that are expanding, which are some of the ones that are contracting? What do you need to do from an SEO perspective within LinkedIn? A lot of people ask questions related to that. So one of the things I want to catch people up on is that I went to a conference called the Kakalaki Conference. So this was a phenomenal little conference in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it was at a series of different presentations from practitioners, but some of the areas I thought were just fascinating was, for instance, a lock picking area where there was an area me and my kids were able to take my kids to this one. We were able to learn how to undo locks and tumbler locks and how to get out of handcuffs. That had to have been the best skill of the entire week. There was how to get out of the double lock handcuffs. I thought that was exciting. There was also a capture the flag where you had a number of different penetration testing capabilities, a couple contests going on. Thought one of it was really broken down for the newbies. I thought that was important. Kind of give the clues, walk them through this, make it really easy, because it's intimidating at first for some of the newer people in cybersecurity. So I really had a good time over there at Kakalaki. And then this week, I'm at that Techno Forensics Conference in Wilmington. I got to speak. I spoke this morning at 10:30. Part of this presentation here for this podcast, I can show it with the world, and I'm going to present it here on the show. But we had a really great time. There was a lot of people there. I would say, I don't know, a lot is a relative term. Let's say 400 people. It seems right around that number. I think the attendance was really well supported in the AI, some of the AI areas, but more importantly in some of the forensics tool sets and the demonstrations and so forth. So it's not just people wanting to hear thought leadership, but it's also people wanting to see actual tools and what they do and so forth. That happened. My presentation was just going over some of the latest threats that are happening from an incident response perspective. The Deep Seas is a cybersecurity company. We have many different services, but our core is our platform, is our managed detection and response. We also manage SIM systems. We also have professional services, advisory, as well as penetration testing, and of course the vCISO function. One of the lessons learned we have from Deep Seas is just looking at the amount of data that comes in. When you see that we have millions and millions of different unfiltered events that come in and logs that come in, they need to be identified, they need to be correlated, they need to be actioned, and so forth. So there is a lot of information that we can glean from these different attacks. For one of the things I want to go over in this upcoming presentation here is just Azure. The move to Azure has opened up the attack space for a lot of people. You can see them moving from the traditional on-prem domain controller over to Azure AD, which is a natural progression, especially when you want to start leveraging O365 applications and using the power of cloud. Microsoft Entra ID gives you a lot of functionality to be able to do things like that. However, your traditional security monitoring tools are accustomed to having that domain controller log information coming into the SIEM. And those rules for brute force attack, password stuffing, all those type of attacks are built into the SIEM. However, they don't realize is that when you set up a on-prem domain controller to replicate to an Azure AD domain controller, you have to use what's called AD Connect. It's a little tool set. It's a little proxy that allows you to connect the two. So that connector does that. It replicates the SAM database information that's within there up to Azure. So now if your laptop is on premises, you can log on locally with a domain controller. If you go to your hotel room, you can log on to your O365 applications using Azure AD. Problem, though, that occurs is that when you move to Azure AD in that way and you start failing authentication, you start brute force authenticating, it's not the normal Kerberos port 8080 that you would see, and you would see a failed logon attempt of 4625 on those domain controllers. You're not going to see that in an Azure Cloud scenario because it's using HTTPS, using stuff like SAML and OAuth to do the authentication and authorization. So what happens if you don't account for those Azure AD logs into your SIEM, you're going to be missing a whole, probably half, depending on the mobility of your workforce, about half of the logs in the events that are occurring.
Cyber battlefield insights, identifying critical shifts and errors leading to intrusion. This is from an NDR, incident response commander's perspective. This is my perspective. Deep Seas, we have about 700 customers around the world. We monitor their endpoint detection and response tools for them, their CrowdStrikes, their Carbon Blacks, and so forth. Not only do we monitor them, but we create threat intelligence. Over 1,000 pieces of threat intelligence go into those platforms. So it's like saying, do you have an EDR? It's like saying, do you have a car? But we make that car into a race engine. So that perspective gives us over 450,000 desktops under management. So out of it, we get a number of different incidents that occur that we have some lessons learned from. Everything's just bombarding us from RSA. A lot of people at RSA, I didn't go this year, but I went to the Khaki Lackey conference instead. But at RSA, there was a lot of talk I'm hearing from all my coworkers about artificial intelligence. Everything was artificial intelligence. And when you look at back and that big outage they had, it wasn't artificial intelligence that did it. It was just human error. So artificial intelligence is no match for natural stupidity. So in this presentation, what I'm going to go over is I'm going to present a little small overview of Deep Seas. I am going to talk about who they are, what's the genesis of the company. It gives us perspective in the data for what's about to come in the later presentation. So this is not a sales presentation, but I do need to qualify where I'm getting my perspective from and what kind of data am I making these inferences from. So threat intelligence perspectives, we also want to be able to pull from some of the headlines, what's going on right now. There's a couple things we want to be able to cover, how that relates. I see a larger trend that's going on. Then a traditional approach towards your security tool sets and everything. I'm going to go over the model of how a CISO kind of looks at it from how do I implement change risk management. I don't do it by picking my tools and develop my risk structure around that. It's develop my risk structure and then put my tools that are aligned to that. We also see some shifting in technology here, just move to Azure and the authentication, going to Azure AD, some of the challenges that occurs, how that changes from a deeper perspective for incident response. When you're looking at failed logon attempts, you're not getting those 4724, 4725 events anymore from the domain controllers. You're getting a lot of these different events that are not showing up because it's now Azure AD. It's showing up in the cloud and it's OAuth over HTTPS. We're also going to talk about that and DNS over HTTP and how that is causing havoc right now in environments. Now, after that, we go over some of the shifting of technology. We move into PowerShell. PowerShell seems to be at the heart of all the intrusions that we're working today. All the different incidents that we have are coming up. A lot of them are remote management tool sets and the use of PowerShell. Then we're going to go over the top 12 areas of focus that make sense for our greatest bang for our buck. So a little background on me in case I really haven't gone over this on the podcast before too much, because you can see my LinkedIn channel from here. But essentially 24 years in information security. I have held many different roles and responsibilities, starting off in the Marine Corps, very technical. I worked on radio systems. I was a weapons instructor. So I got both shooting, blowing stuff up, as well as being able to do IT and build servers and networking and so forth. After the Marine Corps, went into the defense sector, worked at Northrop Grumman, worked as a sysadmin, NT systems administrator, and that started my career off into IT. And that gave me a good perspective on route switch, servers, architecture, before moving into Cisco routers, CCNA, CCNP, and doing infrastructure level things. That migrated me over to Hancock Bank after Hurricane Katrina. There was a 3-month time period I was homeless. My family and I had to evacuate from New Orleans. We had to live with family members for a time period. We had to move around, stayed in a hotel for a couple weeks. So it was an interesting situation, not only to have to go through Katrina, but not to have your home, not to have your job, and not to have your bank account, because both my credit unions, both branches were underwater. So very unique situation, but Hancock Bank, tremendous opportunity, built both their data centers out in Dallas and then the one out in Atlanta, and then became the first data security manager there, being the VP of information security there shortly after for about 7 years. A lot of great people in New Orleans. I still love that town and everyone I worked with. What's really interesting is the information security team that's over there is pretty much the same team I hired 12 years ago. Maybe 1 or 2 people have left, but it's pretty much the same people. I went from Hancock Bank over to Ernst & Young. Ernst & Young had me flying all over the country doing cybersecurity work on their FSO practice. Before I went to Wells Fargo, I did the Group Information Security Officer there. I did a lot of risk management. I used my technical skills, my incident response technical skills there while doing audits and assessments. And then moving on to Cofense. I was the Senior VP of Professional Services. I ran their phishing defense. I built their phishing defense center when I was there. That went worldwide. And then Booz Allen Hamilton is where I spent about 3 years working on big commercial customers, cyber fusion centers, building security operations centers. And at that time, during the pandemic, for 2 years, I was a CFC lead for a large pharmaceutical company. Overview of who DeepSeas is. DeepSeas, 30 years of experience delivering 24/7 managed cyber defense systems. Now, this is several different iterations under different names, but it's the same platform, the same people. When we spun out of Booz Allen Hamilton, we went through private equity, and we are the company DeepSeas. So right around 260 employees, and we have a 700 plus customers. Some of the offerings and solutions that we have, for instance, you can see. We start off really with the strategic advisor and professional services. This is really aligned towards helping you with decision enablement. What should you go after? What should you not go after? What's important? What's not important? And how do you build that into a concise roadmap that's measurable, that is understandable, not just from the technical personnel, but also managerial with any outside security companies that you may have to interact with. We also have offerings on the managed detection and response. So endpoint, email, network, SIM, operational technology, and of course our log management platforms that we're able to provide managed services and multiple different delivery configurations. When you look at penetration testing, surface management, we have the acquisition of Red Team. So we do penetration testing, inside, outside, web application code review. Vulnerability risk management is a big thing. Being able to keep up with patches, being able to run CSerts, being able to manage that is always critical to your environment. So when you look at the DeepSeas MDR continuous cyber protection, so like I was saying before, we have the endpoint where we monitor CrowdStrike, Cortex, SentinelOne, Microsoft Defender, Sophos, Cybereason. We have that network side of that too. We have our own NIDs, so network intrusion detection sensors. We also use CoreLight as a platform as well to push our intelligence out. Very important to have a network taps. Everyone thinks you could just go with an endpoint solution nowadays, but Log4j, all kind of different threats are not detectable by EDRs, they're all detectable by NDRs. So you definitely still want to be able to have a NIDS, and you also want to be able to do full PCAP capture for some of the traffic, especially inside your network. Email, being able to do email response. So when you respond to a phishing email, you submit it, you want to have an organization that takes a look at it, analyze it, and does a response back. Logs, you're looking at Microsoft Sentinel, Devo, and Splunk. These are solutions we bring to our customers to help drive some cyber risk down that they may have. And then from an operational technology perspective, those OT environments, Nozomi is one of our big partners that we do OT work with. Some of these pharmaceutical companies I was telling you about before have big, long manufacturing life cycles for medicine development, for the development of the drugs, for the pushing out and distribution points around the world. So just something by the numbers. DeepSeas SOC by the numbers. So 2023, 82,620,000 unfiltered alerts. Now, out of those, you had 13 million filtered alerts, and then an aggregated alert of 7.3. Now, out of all that volume that you're getting, because you get a lot of noise from all these tools, look at 82.6 million different alerts from down-level tool sets. All that gets filtered and correlated, used on our platform in order to come up with that 36,079 threat notifications. A threat notification is actually an event that's deemed critical that the customer needs to know about and take action on it. And so we either send that as an item of inquiry, or we send that to them as a SEV1, SEV2, SEV3, or SEV4 event. So that's a reduction of about 99.96% of that volume that's coming at you. That's huge. Most organizations have just thousands of alerts coming from it. I can't tell you how many intrusions I've been in where the ransomware showed up on the EDR product. There just wasn't anybody looking at it. No one was seeing the alerts. It wasn't even set to block, and then wasn't even seeing all the activity in the first place. So it has to be managed, has to be cared for. You just can't plop an EDR product in there and expect it to operate at its best performance. Now you look at our TOC metrics. That's our Technology Operations Center. A lot of different deep dives, 113 hours of deep dives with customers. That was like saying an alert went off. One of the analysts needs to either work with that customer back and forth to analyze it, drill down to it. Do we need to get threat hunters involved? Do we need to have malware analysts involved, and so forth? Perimeter hardening requests all the way to that number 451,000 of managed. I think this is a little dated, this slide, because I think we're closer to the 500,000 mark. But when you look at how many total endpoints that we manage from multiple different platforms, and sometimes in the same context, imagine there's a merger, there's an acquisition, you're going to need to manage CrowdStrike on one end, for instance, while you merge in a company that has Carbon Black. How do you provide comprehensive security to both of these? Because mergers and acquisitions are the most dangerous part of an organization or company's life cycle. Ready-made detections. How do you keep up with all that? If you look at an internal intrusion detection capability or an internal SOC capability, just keeping up with SIM use cases and endpoint use cases and network rules and YAR rules and so forth, that's a lot of work. Why have to do that for one customer, one time, do that internal? That's where we maximize our ability to scale, and we're able to do this for hundreds of customers and be able to provide these use cases, keep up with them, make sure they're accurate, and then deprecate them when they're no longer needed and take those out of circulation. Too often people just keep throwing rules out there. So if they have 5,000 rules, I could just say how many different rules, but some are so irrelevant they're not even needed anymore, and that all needs to be cleaned up. Then when we start talking about industry-leading services like getting into mean time to detect, mean time to contain, and then what's your IR onboarding. What's really interesting, mean time to detect, and some of these, you have some customers, or let's just say some EDR product vendors, that if that EDR product saw a malicious file and ate that malicious file within 3 seconds of it landing on disk, they would count that as part of their SLAs. They will say, yes, I'm supposed to respond in 20 minutes for a SEV1, but we're always responding in less than a minute. And the only reason they can say that less than a minute is because they're taking credit for what the product will do normally, the same way as if someone would take credit if antivirus killed a file that's on something. It's ridiculous. But too many people don't understand the details from it. So when they're able to say they're able to respond in seconds, that's bullcrap. There's no human vetting of it. There's no contextualization of it. There's no QA of it. They're just pushing stuff out as quickly as possible. When you look at what does all that do, okay, we had great SOC metrics. We talk about how many unfiltered events. We talk about how many deep dives we go into. We talk about how many ready-made detections and what's the time period. But what does that do at the end of all this, and how does that help? And you look at how does that save customers. We did 88 ransomware attack preventions last year. Pre-encryption, we were able to catch things, shut things down. So rough estimates, about 135 plus million in ransom payments was prevented. Around the average ransomware payment we're seeing is 1.5 million and 1.2 million worth of savings for a mid-market customer. So you can see where just this efficiency on the bottom right here shows just how we're able to do a lot of things with a lot less. From a threat intelligence perspective, there was a 424% increase in small business breaches just the year last. 43% of those were against small business. 60% of small businesses are victims of a cyber attack go out of business within 6 months. I saw that in several of the banks that I worked at. I had a crane company that got hit with an ACH fraud, and it was part of a BEC attack, and they lost over $500,000, and the company went out of business. 15 people were laid off when that occurred. They didn't have a cyber insurance policy, so there's no way to get those funds back. So you can see where some of those hits are 2.2 million a year. Healthcare is an industry that's most at risk from most of those cyber attacks. And it says 14% of businesses rate their ability to mitigate attacks as highly effective. Only 14%. A ransomware attack that really manifested into the real world. So Colonial Pipeline. It was argumentatively one of the most high-profile ransomware attacks of 2021. I know I was in Charlotte when it hit, and I didn't have gasoline at that time because it interrupted the pipeline. So this was an event that happened on May 7th. DarkSide Group deployed ransomware on the organization's computerized equipment, and it manages the pipeline. It looked like the Colonial Pipeline CEO revealed DarkSide attack vector was a single compromised password to an active VPN account that was no longer in use. Well, Colonial Pipeline didn't use multi-factor authentication. The attackers were successful. They were able to encrypt multiple OT machines, and they were able to bring the systems down. When we look at that, that was once again VPN credentials being compromised, lack of MFA. This sounds like a repeat of today. Today in 2024, we're getting the same thing. We're having VPN accounts, we're having firewalls being compromised because they had critical patches on them that weren't maintained. ASAs to Fortinets to checkpoints, all of them have had trouble within VPN that was allowing these type of attacks. Normally, you would have other factors that would compensate for that, such as MFA, but in this case, there was nothing that was on there, and the ransomware was able to run rampant. So we asked, what are the top 10 protective policies? You definitely want to patch those systems. You got to upgrade them. You're going to implement the 3-2-1-1 backup rule, and I'm going to go over that in a minute. You definitely want to start looking at implementing zero trust. Now, zero trust is not a product, it's a framework. So you have several products that allow you to implement and tie into that framework. But just remember, zero trust is a buzzword for a framework. It's a really good framework, but it takes some effort and some time to really move to that. Network segmentation, very critical here. Why are the OT systems are accessed via VPN on the internet? That should have been a segmented network. You shouldn't have had that connectivity. You also look endpoint MDR. There was no endpoint MDR that was there on those OT systems. A lot of the OT systems can't handle them. They're too old. They're older technology. They're not able to handle an EDR. So it gets really difficult sometimes in OT. We're relegated to passive methods such as IDS sensors and so forth, and SIM systems. Now, rapid eradication and recovery is always key. You want to focus on that for your systems. How do I eradicate something and recover? So for instance, if there's an intrusion or you have a malware incident on a desktop in a large corporation, one of the first things we do is quarantine the machine. We use the EDR software to knock it off the network. You can't communicate anywhere on the network, but you can still work with it. You can still pull process trees, you can still pull information, you can still do analysis, you can still do a lot of things. In the past, if you just turned the machine off, we lost all volatile information. You went and packed it up, it got mailed off. Who knows what was running at the time? It wasn't a really good way to do that. So now we're able to use those EDR products, and we even deploy products like a Binalize, where you do a forensics capture bit by bit of that machine and pull that back into your repository in the cloud. So things have really changed over the last couple of years. So you definitely want to do immutable and indelible storage. It's really important. Regular testing and validation. I can't tell you how many customers, only probably 10% actually do the regular testing and validation, where they do their backups, they utilize that 3-2-1 rule, the 3-2-1-1-0 rule, and they're able to actually have test infrastructure to restore it. The ones I find are best at it banks. When I was at Whitney Bank, because of all the hurricanes, and we had to ensure that the mainframe came back up and running, we had alternate recovery locations. Not all businesses can afford that, but obviously $20 billion banks can afford that. Educating your employees what to do, when to do, how to set things up. A lot of times employee education, they're the first ones to tell you something's not going on, or somehow my account's logging on, or I'm getting an MFA prompt, I never logged onto that system. They're always your first line of defense to be able to call in. And that cyber attack playbook, I can't tell you how important and critical it is that you work to walk through what your incident response plan would be. Okay, so we have either a malware situation, we've been contacted, there's an intrusion detection alert that goes off, there's some kind of stimulus that tells us that there's some kind of event that we need to respond to. What do? Who do we notify? What actions can we take? And what preventive controls can we take to contain it? All that kind of stuff has to be thought about ahead of time. Many situations, I get called into an incident for a customer. They were never a customer of ours. They came off through some business relationship. We don't even know who they are. We put them through the sales cycle. We get contracts. We get on the phone. I have no idea how their network is set up. I have no idea how their cloud infrastructure is set up. You're literally having to start from scratch and ask, okay, what is it you do for a living? And that takes a lot of time to get up and running. But one of the things you want to work for is towards that playbook. Who do I call, when, and in what situations? And most importantly, who don't you call in these situations? You always have the tactical law enforcement type side of it, and you have the political or management level side of it. And the tactical people need to understand how to communicate up, what to say, using real words that can scare, such as the word breach. We don't say the word breach. That has a legal connotation. So you're going to say there's an incident that we're dealing with and being able to quantify it correctly. But the big one here we wanted to focus on really is that implement that 3211 backup, which is 3 copies of data. You want to have it in 2 different types of media, so tape or optical or some other type. You have one of them is offsite, one of them is offline, and then you'll have 0 errors on a restoration test. So you restored it, you had 0 errors. So that's really the rule to ensure availability of all your data. Now, let me switch focus here a little bit. And this is dark web market. What I want to show is some live things that are for sale right now. You'll see on the far right here, this is the monthly threat intelligence roll-up from DeepSeas. So you can always go to www.deepseas.com. You can look for that threat intelligence posting, and we do that every month. But you can see here, just there's accesses for sale. So you can see there's an actor on a crime forum was selling RDP access to a New York-based private equity company with $3.5 billion in assets under management for $2,000. What a steal, what a deal. Yet an actor on the Ramp crime forum was selling domain and local admin access to a US-based enterprise with 10,835 hosts in 5 trusts and a USD of 546.1 million in revenue. You would not name the industry, vertical, or a price. So the way this works, these are initial access brokers, so they have compromised a network somewhere. They get as much statistics as they can, what kind of revenue, how many PCs are there, and so forth, and they sell that access to other people, and then they go find other access. They don't have to worry about exfiltrating it. They don't need to worry about lateral movement, any custom malware. They don't have to worry about anything. They just have the access. They get it through a phishing campaign or some other means, and then they're able to sell it on these crime forums. So if you see your company, this is always a good reason to have threat intelligence. So for all our customers, if we saw one of our customers pop here and it looked like their credentials was on a crime site here, we would notify them and say, hey, there's an admin account being sold that's for your network. It's $2,000, it's $4,000, and so forth. We'd do an immediate response on that customer site and then poison all those admin accounts and have them reset. We'd also try and figure out if there was an intrusion, do a compromise assessment. That's always good information. So what is the traditional approach? We're talking about the traditional approach before. So you see here in the top, you always started off with that spam filtering. So we got tired of annoying emails. We got tired of annoying pop-ups and so forth. So we have a spam filtering that looks at content and makes decisions based on content. Right, and then you have known rogue websites that these are C2s to a certain known bad actor, or these are rogue websites. Those are able to block in your web filtering. Now you have legacy AV that steps up, that goes a little bit further than just the web filtering, but also does the known malwares and the known 0 days, as well as fileless attacks and then exploits, or something that regular legacy antivirus doesn't stop. So you have where they'll stop normal malware. Legacy antivirus really does not stop 0-day attacks or unknown malware. They definitely don't stop fileless attacks that run purely in memory. They need something to be written to disk in most cases. And then just a new exploits, very difficult for legacy antivirus to see that. Next Gen AV was created, and you can see where it can cover a lot of those different areas, but it was still lacking in several other capabilities, which is where we moved into the detection side of this, which is EDR, which EDR sits on the top of this. I think of it as advanced antivirus for the most part. This allows us to communicate with these different parts of the stack, as well as manage them, quarantine the host, run incident response toolkits, and so forth off of it, right off of the EDR host. You can also do threat hunting, get very detailed on what process goes where and does what, and it also can plug into different repositories such as VirusTotal and some of your other Intel repository. Allows you to detect security incidents, allows you to contain that incident at that endpoint, allows you to get in investigate mode so you can look at those security incidents, start to correlate different events, and then provide some of that remediation guidelines. So this is how we have progressed over to EDR is being kind of the de facto standard. And so you got to ask yourself, okay, where do I find out where I need to go for EDR? It's always been, this is the standard approach. You go find some website, and here it's esecurityplanet.com. But you go find a website, someone's done some analysis between the different EDR vendors. It'll tell you which ones have rogue system detector, which one has these different features. I love seeing, do you have the ability for custom rule sets? Being an MDR, we create custom rule sets based on new threat actors. We need to be able to push that and inject that into our MDR products that we're supporting. So we like the custom rule sets. Rogue system detection, that's always good. Rogue detection, discovery, they're called different things. But essentially that allows you to find out if there's a host that's joined to your domain that does not have EDR. A lot of times that becomes the source of your intrusion. So you want to be able to indicate how many machines I have total, then what's the delta that have or do not have EDR on it, and the rogue system detector helps you find that out. Now, and then you look at the analysis of that. You can see you can break that down on several different dimensions. How does Microsoft Defender for endpoints work and compare to SentinelOne? I can tell you when it first came out, being in cyber 24 years, in the beginning, Microsoft was a curse word if you ever used that for a tool in security. It just had a horrible reputation for security. Microsoft was offended. Their server systems, their offer workstation systems were breached commonly. So now just to see the product move towards where it's a really robust product set. Microsoft did a tremendous job on it. I was actually quite surprised. Their Defender product is hooked into the kernel at a level that gives you telemetry like other products do not. It used to be slow, I think, for containment. It's all very important to understand what you get, what you don't get. If you are interested in BEC attacks, like I want to track this email and did this person open it? Did they forward it to someone else? By default, unless you have the P2 licensing of the E5 license, you're not going to see that information. So you want to make sure you have premium level 2 logging turned on that allows you to see the BEC attacks. By default, you don't have that. You'll just see some cursory log information. But just like anything in Microsoft, the more granular you want to get at a data source, the more they charge you, and you have to have a licensing for that. SentinelOne is a product we deploy a lot at DeepSeas. We do it programmatically. It's one of those EDRs we can script through a Terraform and push out and manage through APIs. It has a really good interface, and it's built for not only SOC MDR analysts, but it's also built for people like myself, incident responders, when looking at different threats and so forth. But this was always the traditional approach. You go look at some leading trade rag and you go see what's the best product out there and so forth. Look at the environment. Try simplifying this. This is the security landscape, and it's not even all of them. This is just part of it. The one in the red box there is the CrowdStrike Microsoft, which I just highlighted before. So you can see it's just a speck of an ocean of different products and different services that do a myriad of different things. Now, how do you simplify all that, especially when we move into a world where everything is going to connect through Azure AD? So this diagram right here I stole from Microsoft. So it just shows you the hybrid identity and some of the required ports. I won't go into each of the ports here, but what I'm just hoping to show is that you're now authenticating not just with on-prem or AD, you're also communicating with ADFS, you're also connecting with Azure Active Directory, and that's where a lot of the applications, your SAPs, your ServiceNow, Dropbox, all that will be through that Azure AD interface. So as you go to move towards this, it's very important to do it in a concerned and secure manner. Environment. You'd have to plug into your network or connect to a Wi-Fi or something to be able to authenticate to that domain controller. Now, when you replicate that into Azure Cloud, now you've changed that completely. Now you have hosts off of the internet that are connecting and they're authenticating, and you can have someone from India or from Pakistan or from Ireland connecting and trying to authenticate to your network. So you're going to see a ton of failed authentications. You're going to see a lot of MFA prompts coming to you that you didn't see before. You'll see a number of different things. And what will happen is you end up getting locked out on one side, but not on the other, because lockouts and passwords like that do not synchronize back to the on-prem domain controller. Now, PowerShell has got to be one of the biggest holes we see in most environments. So how do you plug that largest leak? How shifting technology infrastructure has been ripping holes in detection and response controls. Look at that. One of the areas we want to be able to see better is in PowerShell. A lot of these attacks are coming now in PowerShell. We're seeing it across the board as a heightened area for attackers to go through. So one of the things that is some of the hardening that we want to concentrate on is transcription is one. This allows Windows to capture the input and the output of PowerShell commands into text-based transcription. So auditing monitoring, we want to use PowerShell transcription. You turn that on through GPOs. We want to take script block logging on for base64 encoding. And what that is, essentially, when you're sending PowerShell commands, and PowerShells are used legitimately by a lot of things on the network. Used in Microsoft Defender to move different signatures. It's moved in administrative actions for different software packages. Now, script blocking allows you to take some of your commands to ensure they don't get obscured or they set off something else. You put it into a base64 envelope, you encode it, and you're able to send your commands on. The problem with that encoding is that when it gets logged into the logs there, locally in the event log, the base64 goes in it. It doesn't get decoded before going into the event log. So you're just going to see this big block of string of text instead of the actual PowerShell command that was run. So you want to be able to configure the system to say decode base64, put the original unobfuscated PowerShell code in the event log. And the reason for that is now we can see when these events are occurring what the commands were, and we don't have to use like DataChef or one of those other CyberChef tool sets in order to be able to decode it. But there is some implications to it. So if you look down here in the bottom, I say there's an impact note. The CIS, computer information, the CIS recommendations not enabling script block invocation over concerns related to logs being overwritten too quickly. So they're afraid of logs being overwritten too quickly and not being retained. They also worry about clear text passwords being recorded in the security log. So there's a trade-off here. So yes, if you're doing scripts, when you're putting passwords in the scripts in order to be able to run that, could that password be recorded in a log audit file? Absolutely could, but this is a trade-off. I would still trade that off. I don't put passwords in PowerShell scripts anyway, but let's say if I did, I would have that as a trade-off, as I would want to see what that end unobfuscated PowerShell command would be. Now, as we move over from transcription, we move over to script execution. So this is policies determine which scripts are allowed to run on a system to prevent unintentional script execution. So this control can be easily circumvented. Just so you know, this is not a security control. This is just a don't shoot yourself in the foot control. So you have script execution policies, and there's 4 policies. You can have restricted, bypass, remote signed, and all signed. So some of these restrictions all can be circumvented. There's about 15 or 16 different ways of doing that. Being able to circumvent these script execution policies. So once again, don't use them for security, just use them for what they're intended to ensure they don't run on the wrong systems. Now, some of the commands you could do to see what is your execution policy. So you can get to a PowerShell command and do the get-help space about _ execution _ policies. That'll tell you what your script execution policies are. And that'll be one area you definitely want to focus on. But the biggest area here when it comes to PowerShell scripting or PowerShell security and hardening is constrained language mode. So constrained language mode, you want to restrict access to commands that can invoke the Windows APIs. Default restrictions include creating instances of most COM objects, user add type to load arbitrary C# code, Win32 APIs, and some .NET methods. What this means is that my PowerShell is a very powerful language. It can do a lot of different things. It's a whole C2 infrastructure if you want to be able to use it, but it's a very powerful platform, but it also allows you to tie into other things to extend it even further. So into that native API, be able to call different C code. That's exactly what they use to download malware, is that add type. So I'll go over that really soon. Whenever they have code and add type on the side of it, normally you'll see a URL, you're going to point to some code over there, and it's malicious. So here's some of the quick examples of some of the tactics that we're seeing. So on the screen, encoding script contained in base 64. So for those who are on the audio only on the podcast here, so I have this function called invoke evil. And that function has a variable called $code. And I put base 64 encoded malicious URL into that variable. And then I run that string and I convert it from base 64. And then I invoke that expression. That's a very basic way that this script runs. It takes base 64, assigns it to a variable, takes that variable, does a system.text encoding out in Unicode, and formats that base 64, and then takes it and does an invoke expression, and that is invoking a function. That's another very powerful thing that you want to see. If you see invoke expression or add type, that's definitely a sign of something you want to take a look at. Now, being resourceful, most of these anti-malware engines implement base 64 encoding emulation. What they'll do is they'll see base 64 in a code and decode it and emulate what it would do if it was allowed to execute. It does a lot of those different kind of tests and controls. Since we also implement base 64 decoding emulation, we're also ahead of time. On the second part of the screen here, you'll see encoding script with an XOR function. I wanted to include this. A lot of times these malware writers, these threat actors, will throw a chunk of data, like XOR chunk of data, into their obfuscation. And what that does is just meant to break your analysis tools. It's meant to be this chunk of data you got to work around to figure out what to do with. So it's just meant to mess you up. MSI, the anti-malware scanning interface. Now this is for you developers. When you're developing your PowerShell scripts, you want to be able to have it deobfuscated. You want to have it tested against an antivirus engine and a lot of different things. Now imagine your application allows scripting. It can accept and execute arbitrary scripts using a scripting engine. Now when that script is ready to be executed, your application can utilize the Windows AMSI API to scan the content. Now, by integrating the AMSI, you can effectively detect and prevent script-based threats. Now, ultimately, the scripting engine needs to process plain, unobfuscated code. This is a critical moment to invoke the AMSI APIs to ensure the script is safe before execution. This is a framework. It allows you to be able to plug into this, whether you're doing PowerShell scripts, VB scripts, other applications. You're allowed to use some of their DLLs. You're also able to tie into third-party antivirus engines that may already be onto that framework. So definitely want you to check out the AMSI capabilities. Right here is a screenshot of an encrypted hypervisor. So this was on a malware, a royal ransomware event that occurred. They hit the ESXi hypervisor, and it was all 120 virtual machines were down. And it was pretty nasty. So there's the only picture we were able to get off of a guy's phone. But you have to remember too, your ESXi, your VMware hypervisor, you want to ensure that's locked down from the root passwords too as well. If they compromise root password, they can get into the ESXi hypervisor and then encrypt all your virtual machines. They don't have to go one by one. They can just encrypt the server that they're all on, and takes out all 120 of them at a time. We want to talk about what does good look like. I thought that was important to understand what good looked like. We talked about this earlier. Cybersecurity success requires technical depth and business alignment. For the longest time, coming up through the ranks, there was a lot of technical alignment, technical depth, but there was no real business alignment. Business didn't know what to do mostly with it. So the way you want to start off is you take your industry, you understand what your regulations, your standards, and what you have to comply with from a business perspective. What are the frameworks that are in your industry? What are the contracts and insurance requirements that you have there? What are some federal regulations that are required? What are just some security standards that you want to make sure that you adhere to, whether your business has PCI requirements because they take credit cards. What you want that to do is you move up from to the depth of business integration on that top left quadrant, and that's risk aligned. So you want to have cyber risk management. You want to have strategic threat intelligence. That's always very important. Most people pass on that. And you have to have security plus business partnerships. to be able to understand that. Now that moves to that right quadrant of cyber tradecraft led. So that's saying I need an incident response management program. I need a cyber fusion center where I'm melding these capabilities together. I need threat detection and engineering. I need threat hunting. I need continuous attack surface management for vulnerability management, so forth. So once I have tradecraft led capabilities that I need, that goes down to product vendor enabled. That's when I start looking of who do I need in my prevent stack, my detect stack, my response stack, and so forth. What products align to that? But what you'll end up seeing here is you'll see the complete opposite. And I swap this around. Most environments that actually fail to bring their technology and to drive cyber risk down, they do it because of this reason right here. They go from product vendor enabled. They start off with going, I like CrowdStrike. So I'm going to put CrowdStrike by the prevent. Now I'm going to go up to the top left and I'm going to see what tradecraft can that product fit into. Okay, I'll have to figure out what box that goes into. Okay, now I'm going to figure out where CrowdStrike goes into cyber risk aligned and then into my regulations. What a backwards way of doing it. No wonder we're never successful doing this backward way. Once again, moving backwards, we want to be able to start off with our compliance, what are our risks, and we're not going to go the opposite. Now, how does that all come together in cybersecurity? How do you, at the deep seas level, how do you put these services together to deliver them in a comprehensive way to hundreds of customers versus the ability just to deliver for yourself? So we structure that in this manner. It helps deliver services on our customer side, but this is just the most logical way of thinking about it anyway. So you have the platform-based services, which is that outcome-based managed service, like continuous 24/7 coverage, your threat detection orchestration, your behavior analytics, threat hunting. We do that through that 24/7 MDR, managed detection and response for endpoint, network, OT, email, SIM, and of course your logging through ThreatWatch. Now that's that blue box. Those are those technical capabilities that align. Now you have that really dark blue box over there. That's your OT assessments. Those for organizations that are manufacturing, pharmaceutical. They have an operational technology environment they have to account for. We have capabilities there that are aligned as well. And then from a incident response perspective, so we have incident response, we have a retainer that we use through our partners. We have an internal incident response capability, but it's really aligned towards servicing other incident response companies. We do not want to be a D4 company ourselves. We're focused on providing platform-based services to those type of companies. Now, vCISO, that's an offering. That's one I run. We do virtual CISO advisory, really three major flavors there. So you need a strategic advisor for only a few hours a month versus you need someone who's riding shotgun with you on the program, driving strategic change and remediation, or do you need us to run the office of the CISO and be that entire capability staff augment for deployed labor? So that's one of our bread and butter services that we have there. And that all aligns towards and helps us with the goal of how does that get all put together. So when we build a cyber fusion center for a customer, we start to build these discrete functionality together with each other through playbooks, and those playbooks get implemented through technology. So you can see up at the top left here, you have the CISO function. The CISO puts in a request for intelligence. Then intelligence goes to the CTI. So what is a request for intelligence? Hey, I would like to understand what are the risks that my industry have and what are the risks I have particularly given my city, my geographical operating environment, given my technology stack, and a number of other factors. CTI helps to give contextualization to threat reports that are coming in and systems that may be affected. So right now there's vulnerability assessments that come out from every major vendor. Imagine having to port through all those to figure out what's actionable, what's not. That's what your ASR function is, or attack surface reduction. Within attack surface reduction, you have hardening of operating systems and servers and desktops and network equipment. But in ASR, you also have the patching and the software management pieces, which are critical. You have incidents and you have C-search, where there's a critical vulnerability, such as Log4j or SolarWinds or one of those big ones. That goes over to vulnerability management team, and you can see that being escalated to them. And then all that plays into a playbook where you have who contacts who, when, where, and why. Always trying to get to that program delivering reduction in mean time to detect. This is where you'd have before, where you have this big long line here at the top, Mean time to detect is the time that anomalous traffic is generated in an environment. By the time that an alert is triggered manually, that time that comes over towards us, the alert there is deciphered in the CFC, and then it's made available, aligned, and then dispositioned where you have a true positive or a false positive. Now they go into a notification period, then that threat notification is acknowledged, then it's mitigated, and then we're in recover. So a lot of times we'll come into a customer's environment, this is all broken, and the process doesn't even finish most of the time. So you want to be able to analyze that and use a platform to get to where afterward you have just a very streamlined approach towards how do you handle low level, level 1, level 2 events that are occurring. You use a product like Carbon Black, it's chatty as can be. There's thousands of alerts that are popping out all the time. It's really hard to narrow and tune that down. We had to do a lot of tuning on that platform. Now, what are the top areas of focus, what we should focus on? So that first one for me, Azure AD migrations, migration tripwires, this is happening a lot. So architecture change is not understood well enough to account for monitoring sensors, data flow, and tool rationalization. That's definitely one within that Azure migration column. Then you have the second one is key cloud security components are missing or overlooked. There's a rush to cloud for authentication infrastructure, exposing complexity, exposing the company to O365 attacks. I went over that a little bit earlier. MFA is still not universally deployed. I thought that would have been a no-brainer. We would have had that a long time ago, but no, we still have MFA challenges. Now, the number 2 on the slide here is firewalls are getting breached regularly. We're seeing ASAs, we're seeing checkpoints, we're seeing Fortinets. They're getting breached regularly here. Not keeping up with patch management and not having a good architecture for it is really the key here. There's a lot of security configurations people don't turn on, they turn them off. So really having someone knowing what they're doing, I always suggest like a firewall management service that's able to take that 24/7. They're monitoring the configuration, updating it, and so forth. When they do massive upgrades because of some patch, you at least know there is a team behind you that's doing it. And so that's always very critical. PowerShell, number 3, PowerShell lockdown. Restrictions are not enabled and attackers can easily run freely. We're seeing a lot of this. Logging is not turned on by default. Logging configuration needs to decode base 64. And then you need to consider using digital signatures for certificates to verify those scripts in your environment. Also, we talked about ad type and language lockdown in earlier slides. Now, new technology. Number 4 is new technology threats to detection. Artificial intelligence, forensics artifacts, model compromise, that kind of stuff, poisoning an AI model. If you remember that story about that Google AI bot that became racist because it kept being fed racist comments, and so it developed that persona. So you can see where poisoning models is a possibility, and it does happen. Then you have a new shift in technology. We're having DNS over HTTP, new protocols, DOH and DOT. Now there's real risks here because normally in an IP network, you use DHCP, you get your IP address, it assigns you your default gateway, it assigns you your subnet mask, and it assigns you your DNS servers. And that's so you know how to get out of your network, you know how to do name resolution and so forth. So every time you go to any website or need any name resolution, UDP 53 over to your DNS server does it, and we're able to collect those DNS logs to be able to do threat hunting later on. What machine lookups are occurring is a very valuable piece of information. However, with this new protocol that's being turned on by default now in several of the browsers, so Firefox and Chrome, this is happening where they're turning this on. We've had 2 incidents that we were looking at and seeing DNS over HTTP. We didn't understand why that was happening, but it's happening at the browser level. Now, you could think it makes a lot of sense. Now, I can, from the provider level, not only provide you internet, HTTP, but I can also provide you your DNS settings in that stream. Now, a lot of people, from a security perspective, hate this because you're combining data and control plane over the same channel, which you never want to have that. You want to have the control plane as separate. You're going to have the data and applications on a different kind of channel. But you'll notice all of a sudden you have, I don't know, 10,000 to 50,000 DNS queries a month, all of a sudden go to 200, and you don't know why. Before you had to turn it on, now you actually have to start to turn it off, or you're not going to have the DNS records. Now, moving on to number 5, we're still seeing remote access solution abused. RDP is used extensively and should only be turned on in a GIT mode, so just in time. I'll talk about that here in a minute. GIT security controls just in time is, for instance, you don't have remote desktop access to that server full time. You would go through a privileged access management request and say at 4 to 5 o'clock for an hour, I'm going to need to turn RDP on to that machine and give me the credentials I need in order to be able to do the service that I need, whatever the technical maintenance is. Now, once that period is over, your RDP access and RDP service is removed from the server, and your access is removed from the server too as well. So just in time is a much better security approach towards this, rather than just having full-blown RDP open to everything. Always look at supply chain compromises. Continue MSP remote management products and services are the perfect target. If you look at Kaseya in 2021, they were used to spread ransomware to all their MSP providers. So everybody they were doing business with, they were able to use Kaseya to spread ransomware. So you always want to be critical of those remote access tools. Make sure there's a prompting and make sure that they can't just have access at any time. Number 6 is configuration drift and technology debt. We're still seeing cloud change management chaotic. I saw where we had a penetration on a server. We had a compromise of a server over RDP that was never supposed to be exposed to the internet. It was accidentally given an outside IP address in Azure and assigned to it, and it became fully exposed to the internet in that manner. And my day, you have to expose a server to the internet. You had to go pull the Cat5 cable out the network interface card, go around to the front switch and go plug it in there and assign an outside IP address. But now you can just assign an address to an object and it's very powerful, and so it does things that were unintended. So you got to be careful about production change management. Definitely look at the Azure roles. They're awfully extensive. So you want to make sure people are put in the right permissions group and not giving extensive rights, but really start to tear in them because there's a lot of Azure rules to get to know. Privileged access mismanagement, excessively high user roles and permissions, admins not following best practices, and then access reviews not being conducted. I've seen admins checking their email with their domain admin credentials and clicking on emails. So what do you think happens when you click on a phished email when you have domain admins? You're going to get compromised. Everyone's going to get owned. So we can only, in many cases, give security principles to the security admins to run for these companies, but we can't make them do it in some cases. So definitely got to be careful of administrative control. We want to have a privileged access management system in play. Changing technology trends also is IPv6 and generative AI. So you have people that are using generative AI in many different ways, as well as how I may use it in my podcast, where I do transcriptions and I have it write descriptions for the YouTube channel and so forth. That sounds very benign, but you can imagine if somebody was saying, please take this legal document with this very sensitive information and write this, or can you imagine someone taking medical record and say, hey, write a diagnosis for this and hand it to somebody, or something to that effect. There's a lot still to go on in regards to that, but that's pretty much my presentation. I had more slides, but I really needed to keep it where it was under an hour. But if you want to find more information about this, please visit me at www.darkstack7.com. I have my podcast there. We'll have several links and a blog. Everybody have a good evening. Thank you. I look forward to talking to everyone soon. Look forward to some more episodes, and you'll have a good evening and goodbye. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Cybersecurity America on the Voice America Business Channel. We hope you've learned some valuable information to help you be a better executive leader and navigate today's complex world of cybersecurity. Until next week, stay secure.